Well, hello everybody, welcome back to Sumatra on Bass. I hope everybody is doing well and things are getting back to normal as much as possible at this time. Today I wanted to bring you the Eden World Tour Pro preamp, and this is available also in a 600 watt mono amp Class D output and a stereo 900 watt. This version has no amplifier, it's just a preamp. I've got a couple of amps. I can always hook it up through those to power speakers, which is fine, but the controls in essence are pretty much the same. It's got the familiar 3-band parametric mids as the other Edens, and if you wanted to check that out a little bit closer, you can just check out the other video just up here on the Traveler 550. It's the same preamp, but the architecture and the gain staging on this is a little different. So let's just have a peek at that and see what the differences are. On the front panel we have a mute. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but when there's a signal from the bass, it flashes to tell you it's receiving a signal, and then you can unmute it and you have that on. Now, this preamp has two valves. One of them is for the initial gain stage and the other one is for a little bit of valve overdrive, and that's controlled by, so this is your gain, which has a lot more range than your standard Eden preamps, because it allows you to go all the way up and drive that second valve into distortion. And the mix knob here blends between the clean sound and the overdriven sound, and of course you can adjust the amount of overdrive. So you can go from having a little bit of hair on it to much, I'll just turn that level down, to about, this is a sort of passive output bass. Even though it's an active bass, it's still, the output is passive level. So that in itself is a little bit different, because Eden has always been considered the amp with a very clean sort of hi-fi sort of sound with a little bit of sheen on the top. As I've described it before, a very pretty sound. And I've always used them for that kind of tone, and I don't really use overdrive tones myself, but on this one here it's actually there, and you can switch it in and out via that little switch under the knob there. And then from there, the other difference to previous preamps, it's got a 2-knob compressor, also switchable by the little switch, and that's actually quite good. You can set, and I'll just go to clean, you can set the level of the compressor, and then you can set the ratio. So you can make it squash as much or as little as you like, which is a very useful feature. So the compressor is so you can have it kicking in just on the peaks, and of course when you see a red light it means that you're overdriving something. The orange light means the compressor is active. So you can dial that in. The next control that's also switchable by the switch here is the enhance control, Eden's enhance. So with that off, we're kind of getting, and with it kicked in just a little bit. And I've found that the rest of the preamp sounds pretty much exactly like the 550 or any other Eden preamp. It's, I think, the same circuit. You have an output level there to send to the output jack or the amplifier or whatever it's connected to. And so dialing in the bass control brings in really nice thick bass, the low mids, which has a lot of range here, so you can find that sweet spot that you want to boost to. So you can get that. You can still dial in that nice thick bottom that Eden is famous for. Very nice, sort of warm sounding bottom end, and also then you can dial in, or cut any other frequencies you want. So I'll just take the enhance out for a minute. I'll cut the mids as we did with the 550. Add a bit of treble. So you can get that familiar Eden sound out of this preamp, or the amp versions for that matter. And I notice again, which is again against the norm today. Today Class D amps are getting smaller and smaller, and these units are 19-inch 2-rack mountable units. Even the preamp and the other amps are exactly the same. So I think that's because they were designed for touring applications, and if you're touring, you'd want to mount these amps in a road case, so in which case having a minimum size doesn't really matter. What all that extra real estate does give you, especially on the amp versions, I noticed they've got the grills front and back for cooling. So it's a cross flow of cooling, and that allows you to mount this in a 2-unit rack, which the top and the bottom can even the sides can be blocked because the cooling is front to back. So that's actually a really good design idea in my book, because you don't want to have a 4-space rack with this mounted in the middle and just 2 gaps, top and bottom. It's just a bigger box in essence. So where does this differ in that case? So we have this this sort of second valve that we can drive a bit. We can blend that sound in. And you can dial in as much or as little as you like. So you can actually make it sound like a valve amp that's being pushed a little bit, or you can make it sound like a valve amp that's being pushed pretty hard. Obviously the Eden preamp always been excellent, and some of the other things having all this real estate gives you is a lot of functionality on that back panel. So we ought to have a look at that next. Now, quite cleverly on the amplifier versions, the outputs to the speakers, there's 4 of them in this area that's blank on the preamp here, and they have lighting behind them that tells you the impedance of the speaker you can plug in, especially on the stereo 900 watter. The lights will tell you what combination of impedance of speakers you can use. It tells you what combination of speakers you can use and what impedances, so it's really easy to get it right. On this, of course, there's no power amp, but you'll notice it has a left and a right output. It actually has stereo effects loop, and it has a preamp send out, a tuner out, a preamp return, and a foot switch for switching out in and out the valve drive, and I think the compressor. It's got some great little features here too. It has an auxiliary in, so if you're practicing with a music player, you can plug it in there, or your laptop, or anything else that plays music. You have a headphone output. You have a balance control which balances between the left and right, and So if you're mixing, say, powered speakers with this, you can balance out the speakers if they're slightly different types, like you might have a 15 and a 210 or anything like that, or a 12 with a horn, or then you have a great DI, both pre and post switchable and ground lift. And here you have an interesting feature, which is the biamp feature. So then your left and your right become your highs and lows, and you can dial in the crossover frequency. So it actually allows you to biamp with this. So you could virtually purchase a stereo power amp and speakers, and then use the left and right to drive the highs and the lows and affect the crossover frequency. You can take that out if you wish. A level for the DI, which is always useful. So that's a nice feature set to have for a Pro Series preamp, because it allows you a lot of connections, and if you're running things in the studio like stereo choruses or delays or stuff like that, if you're doing solo stuff, you can make better use of it in a stereo amp, right? So some of the things I did like about this the cooling, which is front to back, which again allows you to rack mount it in smaller spaces without any heat problems. I like the fact that the logo lights up, tells you it's on. These knobs feel sort of soft to the touch. They're easy to set because it's easy to see where they're at. And of course you have all this control of the mids, which is brilliant. The fantastic Eden enhanced control, and now the tube mix and a better compressor, and a mute switch on the front, which is great, and active and passive inputs. Now, things that I don't like, on the older amps, these controls all had, I think it was something like 20 little detents from the center position to the either end, and when you set it, say 4 clicks to that position, it was more difficult to bump it out of its setting. These ones are rather easier to bump out of their settings, so not quite as good as the original pots that they used to use, but still workable, still quiet. The other thing that I find slightly difficult is that these switches are so close to the knobs, and anybody with fat fingers like mine can have a little bit of a hard time getting in there depending on the angle that you're doing it. So that's my review of the Eden World Tour Pro preamp. It's a nice bit of kit. It's still, the quality is very good. I've opened this up. There is 2 valves in there, 2 twin triodes, so to achieve that second stage of drive, and it's fairly robust, and the build quality is quite good. So I think in recent years the world has moved on from that Eden sound. Back in the 80s and the 90s, Eden was on stages around the world. They were a very common amplifier to see, and speakers, in the back line, and they were very popular because they had that clean sound. They had that sparkly enhanced control, which gave you that edge on the notes, but a sort of soft edge. It was not brittle. It was a very nice sound, and the world's now moved on to different types of sounds, which is progress. It's a change, and I think that drive control is an attempt from Eden to keep up with those types of changes. Now I have to say that I think under the banner of Marshall, they've taken a little bit of a back seat, so they're not getting the marketing that they used to get. They're not as so widely known or accepted these days, and which is a bit of a shame, because some people are still after that nice hi-fi clean sound, and it's a good option if that's what you need. Now, I noticed even the they're endorsing artists. If you look at the list on the website, it's ages old. There's people that shouldn't be there anymore. I'm not saying exactly what with that, but you can tell it hasn't been kept up to date. So the housekeeping is sort of behind, let's say. And that's just one of these things that sometimes these boutique-y sort of brands, and make no mistake, in its day, Eden was at the top of its game. It was the amp to have. And when they first came out, I couldn't even afford one. I loved the sound, I loved the look, I loved those 410 boxes, because they had that nice, warm, punchy sound with a nice sheen on the top. And I played through them several times because they were hired at gigs as the backline, but I could never afford my own. The best I could do later on was to get the 550 Traveller when I needed an actual smaller amp that would do the job. And now that I probably can get some of the speakers, they're really hard to get, because I'm noticing that distributors are just flushing the last bits of stock, and I don't think that we'll be seeing them, at least in Australia. We won't be seeing much of Eden anymore, which is a shame, because they had, so you know, the Terra Nova series, which is a smaller version, again Class D, I believe, and their preamp pedal, which was quite good. So you get that nice Eden sound, better than the WTDI, just had more control on it, better features, I think. So it's sad to see some of these brands sort of just sort of fall to the background in many ways. So I guess if it's your type of sound and you'd like to have a preamp like that for the studio, or indeed the 600 or 900 watt version for live use, now is probably the time to go out and grab one. You could probably get a great deal, and they are a good amp. So in closing, I think the Eden sound is still the Eden sound. It's still loved by many people, but the world in general now has moved on. There are other amplifiers with sort of overdrive and gain circuits that do this sort of thing. And of course Class D has become the smaller and smaller package, and nowhere is that more marked than the Trace Elliot Elf. I mean, I haven't seen a 200 watt amplifier any smaller than that unit, less than a kilo in weight, and fits in your back pocket or your gig bag. I mean, that's pretty small. But with that reduction in size and real estate, you lose a lot of functions that are sometimes very important, which is sometimes like the DI being switchable pre-post, having a speak-on connector for the speakers. See, it's got a jack connector because it's so tiny, right? You obviously can't do the impossible with these things, but they serve a purpose. So it's best for everyone to work out what tools they need for the purpose they are using them for, and get the best tool for that job. Now for me, I picked up this World Tour Pro preamp at a very good price through one of the stores, via the distributor of course, but through the retail store, because it's important to support those guys, especially at this time, guys. Get out there and support your local stores, because you don't want those disappearing. If they disappear, you can order stuff online. If you don't like it, you're going to have to go to the trouble of sending it back, and who knows how that works out. I always like to go and try things at my local store, and if I'm buying something and it's available at a local store, I will go to the store and try it, buy it and pick it up on that same day. So keep supporting those guys. Very important in our industry that we look after each other. And again, just having said that, I picked this preamp up specifically for mainly studio use, but it is going to get racked in a rack bag, so I can take it out on the road. On the road, well, we haven't been on the road for a year now, but I've been using the Alembic F1X. That's my go-to preamp for live shows when I'm playing through front of house and in-ear monitors. And I can also use that and my Eden Traveler 550 as two separate preamps if I'm using more than one bass. Or now I have a choice. I can have two Eden preamps with a World Tour Pro and the 550's preamp, one for each instrument. So it gives me a lot of choices, which is great. So again, it's been nice to spend some time with you. Thank you ever so much for spending this time with me. I'm hoping that things will get better. I'm hoping we'll be able to get more gear in for review. I'm hoping we'll be able to get back to our normal gigs and have some fun, eh? So until next time, keep making music, keep playing bass, stay well, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys real soon.